Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session organized by the African Development Bank and the Africa Water Facility. Our session this morning is entitled Water Security for Climate Resilience in Africa, a focus on Africa, and to discuss transformative water systems for climate adaptation. I'm delighted to welcome you as moderator of this session. And my name is Mchera Chirwa. I'm the coordinator for the African Water Facility, which is housed in the African Development Bank. I would like to welcome our participants who are physically present here in this room. Thank you for making it on a Sunday morning early start. And I'd also like to welcome our participants joining virtually, wherever you may be. We are delighted that you are able to join us this morning. This session will seek to look at how to address challenges relating to water security in Africa, and also in light of the challenges that are being imposed or impacting availability and access of water resources. As we know, water is a source of life, and is also, provides an input to economic development for, food production, for power generation, but also industrial development. However, a number of climate and global risks are impacting the availability of water, as we know. The World Economic Forum Global Risks Report highlights or lists water crisis as one of the top 5 risks globally in its report since 2015. It highlights the fact that short and long-term patterns of rainfall and temperature are influencing how much water is available. And this situation has been worsening or deteriorating over the past years. In Africa particularly, annual total renewable water resources per capita has declined by 41% and 32% respectively between 1997 and 2017. And these trends are forecast to exacerbate or get worse in the future. 1 out of 3 Africans is assessed as being currently subject to severe water security due to climatic and non-climate factors. And high water stress is also estimated to affect about 250 million people in Africa, and forecast to displace up to 700 million by 2030. In the past decades in Africa, drought-related hazards have claimed the lives of over 1 million people and led to economic losses of over $70 billion US dollars over the last 2 decades. More than 1,000 flood-related disasters were reported, involving more than 20,000 deaths in Africa over this period. This is really just to give a snapshot of the challenges that we have. And this panel, this session, will seek to explore how those risks can be managed, how to enable increased access to financing for provision of water security and managing resources in Africa to address some of these climate challenges. And I'm delighted to have a distinguished panel, which I will introduce in a few moments. But to kick us off, we have a keynote address by Dr. Rashid Mbazira, Executive Secretary of the African Ministers' Council on Water Secretariat, AMCOW. I would like to invite Dr. Mbazira to the podium. Please come through.
Thank you very much, Michela. Our distinguished delegates here present and online, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you again, as Michelle has highlighted, to this early morning session. And before I start, I would like to utilize this opportunity. I'll be a bit long-winded in a sense that the topic that you're raising is something that I hold very dear. And having given me the platform, I would love to get a few points across that should also set us to why we are really talking about investments into infrastructure development in the water sector in Africa. So bear with me if I take up a bit of your time, but let me get a few points across. And this is information that is within the system that we also utilizing the resources of the bank and our other partners to keep abreast, to keep running in order to be able to report on the commitments of our heads of state and government that more or less form the barometer of where we are at with the aspirations of Africa's economic growth and social transformation. So, I mean, just to get started, our political agenda, or the member states of the African Union, have got an agenda that is dominated with the urgent need to industrialize as a first step to alleviating poverty. The ambition is to build robust, competitive, and climate resilient economies, to accelerate employment and labor productivity growth, and as a result, deliver inclusive socio-economic development and livelihoods improvement. It is also, that agenda is also to ameliorate the current situation that is summed up by the following facts and statistics, mainly drawn from the Africa Water and Sanitation Sector Monitoring System. Number one, increasing the productive use of rainwater is key to ensuring water security in Africa. Overall, most basins in Africa are more natural than regulated. Except for Northern Africa, the other regions receive quite substantial rainfall, albeit it being highly variable in space and time. Most of this rainfall is not utilized productively, in part due to challenges associated with environmental water scarcity, economic scarcity, in that we have a lot of rainfall that falls in highlands or terrain that is not utilized, or rainforests, and that's water that is not being utilized, or where it occurs in abundance is removed from where economic production is happening. So we need infrastructure to harness that water and be able to deliver it to where we can utilize it productively. And we are not doing that to a great extent. As Michelle has opened, I mean, floods, droughts, and water pollution are the largest threats to water resources in Africa. In only the 8 most prone countries, flooding is projected to cause direct losses of an estimated 1.4 billion per annum. If you look at energy, I mean, now I'm trying to juxtapose this to our aspirations. We are looking at industrialization, but if you look at our installed hydropower capacity, it's between 45 to 91 gigawatts, out of a reported economically and technically feasible hydropower potential of 304 gigawatts. We look at water use in agriculture, which we report at about 275 billion cubic meters, accounting for about 74% of our withdrawals. But our contribution to GDP is lower, and also we are off target on achieving, we are off track on achieving the targets relating to agricultural water productivity and increasing the land under irrigation in Africa. Now we contrast this to the fact that about 26% of the population under 15 years in Africa is in the way, some respects facing severe food insecurity. Let's look at the most recent information, the report that we produced for 2022. It's member states' information that we collected indicates that we provide about 26% of the minimum economic, social, and environmental water demands. This in turn gives an indication of the extent to which Africa's water infrastructure is underdeveloped. Similarly, as an indicator of the long-term sustainability of Africa's socio-economic growth and transformation, the figure raises major concerns for Africa's development aspirations, especially when it's considered that the underdevelopment of water infrastructure accounts for up to 2% of Africa's lost annual GDP. If you look at rainwater harvesting, in part to augment domestic supplies and also to control stormwater management, this is also yet to be fully capitalized. Because if you look at the contribution of rainwater to total municipal water consumption, it only accounts for about 1.5%. The target that our commitments are indicating is 10%. That's what we need to achieve. We are now at just 1.5%. Let's look at the figures on access to potable water and sanitation. The recent information in the WASMO system indicates that about over 340 million people are underserved in terms of access to potable water, let alone access to sufficient water to satisfy their basic daily needs. That number more than doubles in terms of access to basic sanitation. The failings in this respect are shown to contribute significantly to about over 5,000 people that die each day due to the water and sanitation diseases that can easily be preventable in Africa. The estimates of an annual GDP loss of continental GDP loss of 5% due to inadequate provision of sanitation services, and the reductions in household incomes and savings, as well as school attendance, due to the impacts of ailments related to poor sanitation on the labor force, which in turn adversely affect economic productivity and the pursuit of poverty eradication goals. As the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated, improving access to water, sanitation, and hygiene systems hold promise for bringing down the overall disease burden and reducing the number of deaths to diseases. Moreover, Africa's water and environmental resources, which are critical to the release of Africa's development potential, as well as sustaining growth and development, are faced with severe degradation, in part due to inadequate sanitation. Information from the member states indicates that about 90% of wastewater is discharged directly into rivers and lakes without any treatment. The total domestic expenditure in water and sanitation, in the water and sanitation sector in Africa, falls way short of the annual requirement of about 50 billion determined by at the preparation of the Africa Water Vision. And this in turn threatens Africa's aspirations for social progress and productivity and the productivity of our population. There is therefore an urgent need to increase both hydro infrastructure and its coordinated operation to improve accrual of benefits such as flood management, increasing hydroelectricity production, increase agriculture intensification, improved navigation potential, more resilience to prolonged droughts, and reduced evaporation losses. And it's in this respect that we have to promote a new narrative on water that recognizes the full potential of water in the economy to further Africa's future development needs. The new narrative should foster an appreciation of the vitality of water in economic growth, in job creation, and industrialization. We have to strengthen the business case for water investments and raise the profile of water in national and regional development in Africa. The economies of many countries in Africa are extremely vulnerable to climate variability and climate change, as they are largely based on natural resources. Lack of investments to enhance human and institutional capacities, build infrastructure, and improve information systems to support water management exacerbate the difficulties. To overcome these challenges and achieve the SDGs, it's imperative for governments, societies, and the private sector to fully embrace the concept of environmental security. A paradigm shift in the approach to developing, utilizing, and managing Africa's water and related resources is urgently required. The other point that we need to make is that water infrastructure development should be advocated for and promoted as a means to provide a service, which is water, to the economy in order to enable growth and development to happen. Water sector interventions, especially such resource management functions as water storage and flood control, should not be designed and marketed from the perspective of water sector development. Rather, the approach should be packaging them for investments centered on their eventual utility from an economic perspective in terms of providing water for food and energy production. This should be extended to the opportunities for employment and wealth creation, not to mention peace, social security, and political stability. Application of the water, energy, and food ecosystems nexus approach to promote and facilitate investment-led transboundary management and governance of water and environmental resources is an approach that we also need to be considering. The aim is to consolidate and capitalize on the achievements to date on implementing the principles of integrated water resources management. It is thus important to revitalize implementation of the following ongoing initiatives: establishing economic accounting for water as a discipline to, among others, improve the financing and investment outlook for the water resources management function in Africa, improving national level capacities for collecting complete and reliable hydrometeorological and piezometric data in all Africa's 64 shared basins, applying Nexus perspective solutions to assure water, food, and energy security in Africa, improving agricultural water management, implementing the priority transboundary water and energy projects of the Programme for Infrastructure Development in Africa, enhancing use of wastewater and sludge as appropriate and acceptable for nutrient recovery in agriculture and biogas energy production, standardizing regulatory frameworks for agricultural water management across Africa, and developing and adopting legal policy and institutional frameworks for the collection and treatment of wastewater to a minimum quality standard before discharge into transboundary water courses and aquifers. And finally, supporting member states, river and lake basin organizations, and regional economic communities to conduct water resources assessments, as well as supporting them to monitor and manage groundwater use. And if we can at least get to address some of these issues collectively, there is promise that we can be able to tackle or utilize our water resources to enhance our adaptive capacity and also be able to mitigate some of the challenges that we are facing with climate and impact. So I hand over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbazira, for setting the scene and providing a context of the challenge, but also the opportunities that we have in Africa, benchmarked against the ambitions, the reality on the ground, and the gap that needs to be filled in terms of both financing as well as investment and infrastructure development. I'll now invite Mr. Elikan Nyabia, a Senior Advisor on Water Resources and Climate at the Africa Water Facility, to share a few slides on the transformative impact of water security and climate in Africa. Elikat, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Elikat Nyabia, Technical Advisor to Africa Water Facility on water resources and climate change. This morning, I will take you through transformative water systems for climate adaptation. You know that water is life. Water security without climate resilience, we shall not have water. We see trends on Africa of increased water stress, aridity due to prolonged drought. On the other hand, in some parts of Africa, we see increased floods that are causing infrastructure loss and also affecting prosperity and, of course, systems. So I will dive through what are the approaches that the bank and Africa Water Facility is using to strengthen water systems for climate adaptation. First of all, I'll highlight what are the water security challenges on the continent, climate impact and trends, the transformative water systems change approaches, and then I talk about financing. On the continent, we have basically four major challenges. The first one, of course, as you are aware, is population growth is increasing. We see a lot of increased urbanization and migration from rural to urban. Climate change is a major challenge coupled with increasing demand. Of course, in Africa, most infrastructure is poor, and also we see operational and managerial inefficiencies. I'll just highlight in terms of example of East Africa, where we see a lot of trends in terms of prolonged drought and increased aridity in the region. In terms of trends, of course, we see increased temperatures in the case of East Africa, increasing aridity in the Horn of Africa, frequent and intense floods. As you saw in Somalia, there was a lot of movements and displacements due to floods and also prolonged drought. We see more frequent drought as well in the region and increasing seasonality over the continent. The triggers for transformative systems change is that the incremental adaptation strategies are not working anymore. So it's high time we looked at the root causes of vulnerability, and also considering that climate change requires greater integration of climate change risk and management of hazard management efforts. We need to apply innovative system-wide approach to climate adaptation. This is a kind of conceptual thinking systems approach to transformative water systems aimed at creating resilient water systems. It's very important that we must have good knowledge, information systems that guide us in managing our data, information, and knowledge so that we can manage our water sources systematically. We must look at the system diversity dimension of this approach, looking at policies, looking at systems restoration to support climate action. It's extremely important that we manage our infrastructure development, looking at robust systems and also using smart technologies and, of course, nature-based solutions. Governance and institutional capacities are very key for the management and governance at scale of our systems. So if you combine these three dimensions, then you are at par to sustaining and making water systems resilient. In terms of diving down to water governance, we look at three dimensions, basically strengthening governance at various levels, highest level up to community level. For transboundary water resources, we have transboundary governance systems. And of course, this has to be coupled with regional integration if it cuts across different countries. In terms of knowledge, it's extremely important that we do drought early warning systems, flooding warning systems, and also we intensify Earth observation systems looking at land, water, and ecosystems because they interrelate each other so that we're able to plan and forecast the effects of climate change. In terms of infrastructure, to ensure that we adapt to climate change, it's extremely important that we look at storage requirements for sustaining water and sanitation systems. We look at productivity, enhancing rain-fed systems for multipurpose uses, agriculture and livestock. And we also look at sustaining our irrigation systems because most of the water is taken through irrigation demand for food and agriculture. And of course, it's very important that we look for alternative water resources and through renewable energy approaches, recycling, and using smart technologies for groundwater development. In terms of system diversity and restoration, we have to embrace digital transformation, real-time management and monitoring of our water systems. We must restore and intensify our systems here through nature-based solutions and, of course, supporting green infrastructure in managing our water systems. Just to give you a summary or conceptual framework of transforming water systems for adaptation, we need to look at people who are vulnerable as a first priority. This is part of the no-regret measures for climate change. We need to prioritize system-wide action, holistic approach that supports NDCs and NDAPs. We need to plan for extreme impacts and therefore make our systems more robust. And it's extremely important that we invest in climate information systems, align climate finance to accelerate resilience, as well as use water as an enabler, since water supports food, energy, ecosystems, and most importantly, peace. So we need to change our pathways and change the paradigm shift, sustaining and managing our systems better. Also, in summary, it's extremely important that when we talk about climate change mainstreaming, we have like kind of three blocks that we have to look at. We have to look at mitigation and green growth, adaptation and risk management, and building resilience, looking at the various parameters you might see on the session. So what are the approaches the bank and the sector we feel that is very important to support water systems? First of all, it's extremely important that if you're implementing a project through analytical work, you do climate screening and proofing at entry. Here, I mean, you should be able to identify the potential climate risks that affect a particular project and are site-specific. Target vulnerable people so that the impact, where the impact is greater. Of course, when we talk about resilience, we talk about water resources, sustainable, managed, and exploited. We talk about water infrastructure built in a robust manner, stronger and better. Policies and strategies that facilitate action and governance. We're looking at institutions and partnerships, and then, of course, the community, and, of course, the cross-cutting issues of social, gender, and youth empowerment. This is my last slide. I wanted to highlight Africa Water Facility supports a number of water programs, and this is the dimension we support to facilitate water adaptation. We support water supply projects, we support sanitation projects, agriculture, climate change and mitigation, integrated waste management, transboundary, and knowledge and governance in quest for transforming water systems. These are some of the resources. If you wish to dive down and see where we got the information, you can read through. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elikad. So we've had, dear participants, two presentations, a keynote speech by Dr. Mbazira from AMCAO, providing the continental context, challenges, ambitions, and the gaps. And we've had a more technical type of presentation or intervention from Elikad with a focus on East Africa, showing the challenges related to climate change, but also presenting an approach, a transformative systems approach to climate adaptation, and also demonstrating some of the interventions or initiatives that the African Water Facility and the African Development Bank are taking to try and address or support countries to address those elements. We are now honored to have a distinguished panel whom I will introduce to come and share their perspectives on these very important issues. First, I would like to welcome Ms. Farai Angela Tunuma. Please come forward. And the technical team will help with the microphone system. Ms. Farai Tunuma is a senior advisor, water and climate resilience at UNICEF. So welcome, Farai. Next, I will invite Mr. Jochen Ranger. I hope I pronounced the name well. Mr. Ranger, welcome. Mr. Ranger is the head of division for climate change, rural development, and infrastructure at GIZ. So welcome, Dr. Ranger. And last but not least, I welcome Engineer Mwajuma Waziri. Please come through. Engineer Mwajuma is Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Water in the Republic of Tanzania. She'll be here also to share perspectives from a country or government point of view. So as the IT colleagues are helping with technology, the microphone. I'll first perhaps invite Engineer Mwajuma to intervene first and share with us your perspectives in this particular issue, the challenges and where you see opportunities based on the two speakers and also from your own perspective in Tanzania. Engineer Mwajuma.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. On Tanzanian perspective, first of all, the climate impact is very big. We have around 61 million people in Tanzania, and around 60% is staying in rural, and less than 40% in urban areas. But also still, we have a problem of access to water, apart from what plenty of water resources we have on surface and groundwater. The main challenge for having that situation is financing issues. So we have the sources, but still we didn't attain. The accessibility of water, when you are talking about water supply, it's about 85% for urban and 77% for rural. So you can see when you are talking about that kind of population, how the problem is. When you are talking about sanitation issues, we are still around less than 50%. And when you are talking about the sewer network, which I think is a major issue when you are talking about the water resources, pollutions, is less than 13%. So to align with SDGs, and we have our own targets, but the major problem still is financing. When you are talking about aligning climate to financing issues, I can see it could be a big opportunities to grab this kind of financing. And you can, as you mentioned, we have 3 sectors. We have water, we have sanitation, we have agriculture, and we have energies. When you are talking about climate impact, it is correlated to drought and floods. Sometimes we can think of constructing big dams when you are talking about infrastructure development, big dams which will help us in dealing with flood issues. And it could be multi-purpose, which can cover hydropower, producing a certain energy. It can cover agriculture, irrigations, and at the same time, water supply. But the problem also is financing issues. But when you are talking about such kind of development infrastructure, you can see it's clearly correlated and aligned to climate issues. And sometimes you can think on about constructing the big dams to align with the drought issues. We have those cases. For example, you want to build Songwe dams, which will produce around 108.5 megawatts. It could be used to irrigate around 600 hectares. And also it could help us to cover water supply. That is multi-purpose, but it can also help us to alleviate floods. But when you are talking about drought, we have, but the cost required is around 1 trillion shillings. When you are talking about $1 billion US, you can see the huge investment. And if you want to deal also with the drought, we have one project called the Lugoda Dam. It helps us to sustain the ecosystem for rivers. During the drought, you can see there are fishes, they are suffering. Different animals are dying because of lacking water. But if we align this project to climate issues, you can see it sustains drought, but it also helps us develop ecosystem of the things. So I can conclude by saying that there is a big opportunity by aligning this climate and financing issues. And we have existing one project financed by GCF, purely climate resilience. It helps us to respond on the agriculture, sanitation, water supply. So if we align together and these 3 sectors could speak together in order to make sure we sit and come up with one project rather than having energy, its own project, water, its own project, sanitation, its own project, we can combine and think having a very big project related to climate issues, and finally, it could help us to alleviate having a climate resilient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Majuma. I think you've clearly articulated an example or examples from a country perspective and the challenge of financing against priorities that are already identified to address the water supply and nexus investments through multipurpose investments, but also addressing climate impacts as a result of flooding and drought. I'll now invite Farai to share your perspective, either from UNICEF, but also from your professional experience on the issues being discussed here. I think you have the mic, so maybe you can go ahead.
I've heard many countless speakers speaking about how water, sanitation, and hygiene is really something close to their hearts. And I'm also equally passionate about water, sanitation, and hygiene, and how we as a sector respond from a climate lens. From a UNICEF perspective, Muchera, just before COP, we launched a report which was called The Climate Changed Child. And that report really drew us to very shocking numbers. So we've got about 439 million children globally who live in areas of high water vulnerability. And when we reflect on water vulnerability from a UNICEF perspective, not only do we reflect on water scarcity and water stress, but we also reflect upon the governance systems that are there, as well as their ability to respond, including the access that families and households have for the service. And that's how we look at what we call water vulnerability. And when we did that analysis, we found that 8 out of 10 children in countries like Namibia, Chad, Burkina Faso were at risk. And when I was personally reflecting upon these countries and my many journeys right across the continent, they would not be the countries that one would think about immediately. So for me, this goes to say that climate change is now really bringing in a dimension where our past experience is being challenged, because when you look at climate forecast, climate analysis, the forecast is way beyond what any of us could imagine in terms of impact. As UNICEF, we are working on the Water Security for All initiative, and here we are aiming to address these 439 million children through a number of approaches. So the first is really around shifting the WASH sector in terms of how we look at ourselves from a policy perspective, from integration of climate risk, from ensuring that our NDCs and NABs talk to the WASH sector. There's exciting research right now which talks about the impact of sanitation on emissions. How are we integrating those conversations into these key guiding documents that allow us to access climate finance? We also look at climate finance, working very closely in a sector where financing has always been challenging. And when we now add the climate layer, it becomes even more difficult to make these links come through. So through Water Security for All, we are working on the climate finance elements, integration of renewable energy, but also looking at the WASH sector as a low carbon emitting sector, so that we are able to speak the climate language, but also be able to draw on the resources coming through from the climate pillars to help us to rise up to the challenge. And then lastly, we are focusing on scaling infrastructure and services. And one of the big milestones, particularly coming out of this COP, is the recognition of climate resilient WASH under the global goal on adaptation. So the whole question is now, how do we achieve this climate resilient infrastructure and bring it to practice and to bear? And I see a lot of alignment with the two presentations that we've seen. For us at UNICEF, the first thing is integration of climate risk assessments into the work that we are doing, understanding the context, the locations, the climate focus, and saying what do they mean for the service provision, for water demand, for the service models that we are applying, for the type of infrastructure that we are putting in place, as well as for the environmental water resources considerations. Are we not overdrawing on resources? what does it mean? What we previously could get before we could recognize the impacts of climate change, has that changed? So from our perspective, just looking at the water security perspective together with an in-depth understanding of climate resilient water services would really help us to move the continent. Now, why move the continent? We have a young growing population which is going to double by 2050, which we would like to see being much more economically engaged and not losing countless hours or health issues because of wanting services. So indeed, climate resilient water sanitation and hygiene is quite a critical element for Africa's growth, but also for Africa to have a healthy contributing population.
Thank you very much, Farai, for those insights. Very, very pertinent to this. I mean, the focus on youth and the impact that underinvestment is having on young people in Africa, how we could align our investments to secure financing from climate resources and address holistically the challenges that we have. I'll come back later to you and to all the panelists with some specific questions. But let me give the opportunity now to our third panelist, Mr. Johan Renger from GIZ, to give us your perspective from GIZ's work and your understanding of the challenge we're discussing here, and how we could also channel more financing from climate funds to address this challenge. Please, you have the floor.
Inviting GIZ to this Sunday morning session. I'm very honored to be with you. My sincere thanks to our two previous speakers, Dr. Rashid and Dr. Elikat. It has been really very much inspiring to listen to you, and I would like to, reflect a little bit on what you have said, because it was very much inspiring listening to you with a perspective of this, transformative approach, or talking about transformation. When I listened to you, the question came into my mind: when we talk about transformation, what is our vision of a kind of final destination of this transformation? Where do we want to go? What kind of future, or which future do we want to live in? And it's a little bit philosophical, maybe, but it's very, very important to have a clear picture, because otherwise we cannot transform, because we don't know the direction. So maybe sometimes the direction shift, but I think this is very much needed to go for a visioning exercise, especially when it comes to the water sector. In energy, it's very easy. It's 100% renewables. It's 100% access to energy. In water, we need something similar. I mean, the SDGs provide a perfect ground, for setting our vision, But it's not only, a kind of measurable thing that we achieve 100% access to safe water and sanitation. The question is also, what are the values going to be we would like to have in the future in terms of our final destination? And this brings me now to what you have highlighted also when you elaborated on what to do in the transformation and what kind of instruments we have to use. When we talk about a successful transformation process, there are key factors for success from our experience, and also I'm convinced about. First of all, it's all about stakeholder participation. And this is extremely interesting, or this is extremely important in the water sector. We have to have this stakeholder participation on the local level. It's all about, water user groups. It's all about, on the regional level, water basin organizations, and also on the very national level. Another thing is, and that has been also introduced, is a more holistic approach. Yeah, we are not talking about the water sector alone. Yeah, we need to have a cross-sectoral perspective, and we also need to have a kind of nexus perspective. Yeah, and when I look what has been discussed on the COP, we've been discussing a lot about, you know, the water, food, and energy nexus. Just to refresh our memories, today we do have the food, agricultural and water day, so you can see this kind of combination. And you, Dr. Rashid, you have outlined this actually nexus. And I think when we talk about a transformative approach, it's very, very important to have this holistic perspective. In addition, we are talking about a just transition. In this COP, I've heard many times the expression of a kind of just resilience. Yeah, and this is also something we have to bear in mind. Yeah, when we talk about water, what is just? Yeah, we need to have a definition. It's not easy. It's not easy to elaborate on that. Countries are different. They have different country perspective, but we have to address the issue of, you know, having a just wider water sector. And coming to the end, the question was very much about, you know, what are the financing schemes, what are innovative financing mechanisms, and so on and so forth. Well, there is a lot of money available, but what I can see is that we have difficulties in, you know, investing and bringing the money available into, you know, sound and good projects. Yeah, I talked to development banks yesterday, and they asked me, "Can you give us good and viable projects?" Yeah, because we have a lot of money to spend. Yeah. Now, this brings me to the question: what do we need, or what are the, let's say, the preconditions to go for a successful infrastructure financing? And this has been also said in your presentation. To go for the institutional framework in the water sector, we need a good water law. We need a sound regulatory institutional setup that can encourage banks to move in. And also we are talking about the private sector. Yeah. Banks cannot make it alone. We need a lot of private sector investment, and the private sector also need, you know, a good environment and climate to invest. Yeah, and this is also very much needed. Yeah. I got your signals. I'm talking too long already. Please apologies, but I really wanted to reflect on what you have said. Yeah. Because of your, you know, inspiration, and I hope we can have a fruitful discussion on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johan. No, you were not talking too much. You were hitting the right notes, I would say. I think I've taken note of the points you made, very important and pertinent. You touched on the importance of stakeholder engagement in development, the importance of looking at the challenges in a holistic way, a holistic approach, looking at you know, the nexus, again, which has been a recurring theme in this COP, and generally how to address climate challenges related to water, the food and energy nexus. But also, you touched on a point of good projects, you know, to be able to channel investments. I mean, I can say in the work that we do in the African Water Facility, we are supporting the preparation of good projects. And the investors you talked about can come and talk to us. We have projects that the countries have prioritized, or we are supporting, that we are also looking for additional investment in. And I think Engineer Majuma also talked in the case of Tanzania of some good projects, some of which we have worked to support. So the projects are there, and we can work together to, you know, to try and find more investment towards those projects. No, but thank you very much for your introductory. I have some specific questions now for each of you. Beginning with you, Engineer Majuma. What do you think are the financing opportunities, you know, that will arise from aligning water security and climate objectives? I mean, for example, in Tanzania, which I think would also be replicable in other countries.
Thank you very much. To me, I can think that aligning water, as I mentioned, aligning water to climate financing could optimize the application of various projects that in future could help us to climate resilient issues. We as a government of Tanzania, when we were talking about water sectors, as mentioned by my colleague here, we also encourage, we understand there is a challenge, there is a barrier, which leaders, including the policy, involvement of private sector, institutional issues. So we try our level best of internally first to make sure our policy could align to help us making sure when we want to apply for this climate financing project, our policy also is aligned to that angle. And also we encourage more private sectors to be involved in coming. And also utilities, we have basins, we have utility, the Ministry of Water has a lot of water institutions that is below. We have universities, we have RUWASA, we call it rural water, and we have urban water utilities, and we have basins. So all those we align together to make sure that their institutions are well stipulated, to make sure if investors or donors come, wherever the project is in climatic way, in the issue of climate financing, it's aligned, there is no barrier for that. That is how we as a government of Tanzania, we plan to make sure the environment is good and we can invest more and more on this climate financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have touched on the importance of aligning policies and strategies, approaches that will enhance alignment of water sector or security objectives with climate objectives to secure financing, and how to overcome those barriers to attract more investment and private sector. We can talk some more about private sector investment in there and what exactly as a government your approach would be to ensure more private sector investment, but we can come back to that later. Let me ask Farai specifically, from your perspective and the work that you do, what do you think are the effective approaches, right, to ensure that we are climate-proofing water and sanitation projects in Africa?
So one of the big questions we always get is, what is the difference between the climate resilient work that we do in water sanitation and hygiene and business as usual? And I think the key here is how we integrate climate risk, vulnerability, and impact into the solution finding that we put in place. Particularly on our discussions on the global goal on adaptation, we have been able to come up with a number of groups. So the first group is the group that does not have sanitation services, but lives in areas that are highly impacted by climate. And here the challenge is often we are supposed to give solutions, for example, around a flood and a drought, or even simultaneously to the same cohort of people. Then we have the second group, which is the group that has services, but these services are not well aligned to the nature of climate risks that they are facing. And here retrofitting, for example, is required, or interventions such as water demand management, because we are taking into consideration scarcity of resources or related pollution, water treatment requirements. So when you look at these two groups, how we integrate climate risk, how we strengthen our preparedness. So I saw a lot around early warning systems, particularly related to water resources management, but we also require the same early warning systems within our utility systems, and even more importantly for Africa, within our small-scale water providers or our self-supply approaches. And these all require different levels of capacity and approaches, service models to be applied. So when we look at these different clusters that require service, we now need to think that step further in terms of how we move from business as usual to a much more climate-informed, climate-responsive perspective that also builds in awareness that climate impact can come, but we are also then able to reinstate services quickly when those hazards do hit us. So there is a lot of work to be done, particularly around these capacities related to climate and how we bring them into a very sophisticated sector where we have lots of participants, where the needs of the users themselves are key, where the behavior change requirements for users, but also us as practitioners are critical so that we shift from business as usual to business unusual because of climate change.
Well, thank you very much, Farai. Very, very interesting points. And I like the emphasis of business unusual as opposed to business as usual. So it requires a mindset change, a change in approach, and addressing issues from a holistic perspective, as shared previously by Johan. But I also like the idea that you share about grouping the needs, looking at those that have no services but in a highly vulnerable environment. How do you address those? Those that have services, but maybe those services are not well aligned with the climate challenges and particular situations. So that speaks to me to an approach that is not bespoke, but addresses specific needs with a specific approach. But we need now to align that to financing. Yes. And that comes to my next question to Johan. Could you share with us what you see, some of the innovative financing examples or approaches that could be applied to address this, to contribute to water security, but at the same time also addressing the climate actions? Johan.
Thank you very much. Well, I can speak from, a development cooperation point of view. What we can see now, what is in the pipeline, so to speak, what are the mechanisms and so on and so forth. Yeah, I'm not a private sector person. I'm not a banker or a development banker, so to speak. But as far as German development cooperation is concerned, we have quite a significant number of financing in the multilateral system, yeah, and this goes also to UNICEF, for instance. Germany is one of the largest funder of the Green Climate Fund. Yeah, I'm very happy about that. The fund has been just replenished. Now it stands at 12.8 billion US dollars. I guess this is very, very good news. And the Green Climate Fund, and you have also experiences with the Green Climate Fund, is now a perfect vehicle. I mean, it's the funding instrument of the UNFCCC process. Also, I must say it's a little bit complicated. It takes a long time to get projects done, but when it's all set, then it has a great impact. In addition, I'd like to draw your attention to the European Union's model of, the Team Europe initiatives. There are many, many good initiatives, I would say, especially the initiative on transboundary water management in Africa. It's a kind of flagship program also for German development cooperation, contributing with its altogether around 145 million euros. And the clue about this Team Europe initiative is also to bring together various stakeholders, such as the African Union Commission and AMCAO, regional economic entities, and so on and so forth. It brings in finance, but it also brings in, synergies and coherence. And when we talk about finance, it's not always about, increasing finance only. we have to have a look to how to combine these financing instruments or financing mechanisms. It's bilateral financing, it's multilateral financing. There is still room for improvement, to have the real synergies in actually place. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the Urban Water Catalyst Initiative, which is a joint initiative by Germany, the Netherlands, and the EU. And this initiative aims at mobilizing public and private sector finance. And it plays, really an important role in the SDG of water. So I'm talking about number 6, sure, water and sanitation, but it pays also off in terms of, the climate SDGs. Last word regarding finance. As I said, capacity building is crucial to absorb financing, and the better the capacities are on the very local, the regional, and the national level, I'm convinced, then the private sector will really move in. Then they have sound ground for doing business, and they have, also a perspective of any kind of return of investment. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Johan, for that. Very important points that you make and examples of sources of financing that are also innovative, like the Green Climate Funds that Germany is also contributing to. I think you shared an initiative or financing mechanism by the European Union supporting transboundary water development and cooperation. I think also very, very essential, and how to build in climate resilience in those investments. And also the instruments around blended financing, where public and private funds can be blended or syndicated to support investments, and the importance of capacity building that you also talked on the ground, where increased levels of capacity and knowledge can attract more financing from both public and private sources. Thank you very much to the panel so far. We have some time available to take questions from the participants. So I would like to invite any of the participants who wants to raise a point or a question for the panel to respond to. Anyone who has a question, please. Thank you very much. Just introduce yourself and then the question.
My name is Noriko Yamada. I'm from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, and I've been in Tanzania as an advisor for JICA in the water sector in 2017, and also have lived in Malawi for 2 years. So have been working in Africa and in the water sector for the last 10 years. Now in JICA headquarters, I am working for the Office of Climate Change, so I'm very happy to see that the water sector is moving into climate. And I see your struggle in getting climate finance and how to, incorporate climate words into the way we have been working in the water sector. So very happy to being updated on what is happening in the sector and how everybody is moving forward. So my question is to Johan to see how GIZ, a bilateral like JICA, is working inside your organization to have actually the water sector, the managers, more climate literate, right? And to speak in accordance to what the climate sector it's willing to hear, right? So get our water managers' voices heard with the proper words, so that everybody is, climate literate, and we can find a way to access to those climate financing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. The question from JICA for Johan. I think he has taken note. Any other speaker or participant who wants to raise a question? Julia.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Lacala. I'm from the African Development Bank also. And my question, I wanted to put the accent on groundwater. because groundwater is the main source of drinking water for a large proportion of Africans. In fact, some reports say that up to 75% of Africans rely on groundwater for their drinking water. But at the same time, it seems like groundwater use remains below the sustainable year in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, even though groundwater has an immense potential to enhance Africa's water security and plays a critical role also in climate change adaptation. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can attract more financing towards projects that have to do with groundwater development in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's an open question. Any of the panelists can respond. Any other at the moment? Okay. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Francisco Bendaño from IFC, World Bank Group. I really was motivated to go deeper into what UNICEF mentioned about how to make sure that not only through public funds, but also through the private sector, we can make sure that we are talking about adaptation and water, not only in the sense of infrastructure and building, projects, but also providing the ability to quickly resume activities, to have a more operational view on resilience, because many times when we talk about impacts on communities, like say on farmers in Africa, it's not only about rebuilding, it's about giving them, for example, liquidity, it's giving them about restoring the access to essential services. So in the case of the remit of UNICEF, when we talk about children, for example, going back to school and how we can make sure that that happens after a climate event is actually within our radar. So I would like to hear your views on how you have seen some lessons that are working in the context of Africa, and especially for children going back to school with the help of funds for resilience when it comes to liquidity for families, for farmers, and all that, so they don't have to be back on the field working, but back to school.
Great, thank you very much. That question from IFC. I'll now ask the panelists to respond. I think the first was to you, Johan, from JICA, about your, as a bilateral, similar to JICA, how are you working? Please.
Thank you so much. So it's not ladies first, it's gentlemen first. Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I grew up in the water sector silo. And it took me some efforts to leave this silo, to be honest. And I like your expression of it's a struggle. And it's a permanent struggle. And it needs a lot of attention to have this kind of broader view. Exactly having the perspective on adaptation and mitigation, by the way, in the water sector. So what are we doing as GIZ from a very, very operational level? When we do conceptual development, we do have, the teams that represent not only the water sector, but also agriculture and climate, and so on and so forth. So we go for mixed teams. That's not always easy, and I tell you also why, because some of our clients and commissioning parties, they order water supply in urban areas, and they do not request just water resources management, or resilient water management. So this is something we are also working on. It's getting better, My wish list is very long. It's actually changing, but this is something we are actually struggling with, as you have said. So when it comes now to this, having the climate lens or having the climate perspective, within GIZ we do have safeguards. So every project, whether it's water or economic development or TVET or whatsoever, it goes through an assessment and a check-up process that makes sure that the project has a climate impact, yeah, and to make sure that the project does not have an unintended negative climate impact. Yeah. We also stick to the OECD climate markers to make sure that, you know, the projects have this kind of holistic, you know, and here in our case, climate perspectives. So this is what we are doing internally. It's on a good way, I must say. It still needs, you know, there's a little bit of room of improvement for sure, yeah. But, you know, what I really like is, well, actually, it's all about attitude, yeah. I mean, you have to be a person with a holistic view. You have to accept that world is not black and white. Yeah, you have to leave your sector silo, and you know this is all about, you know, also working on your own perspective that, you know, brings in much more of mitigation and adaptation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. Spot on. I mean, coming from the African Development Bank, I can speak to similar challenges for a large multi-sectoral institution. We tend to work in silos, you know, from the past. Each sector has targets to deliver, but at the end of the day, we have teams. And in those teams, we have different expertise, climate, social, environmental safeguards, gender, you know, all the other elements that are in the ecosystem. And now more and more forced to work together. So every project, every intervention, every operation has to address all these elements within it. So it's a process, I think, systems approach, but also, as he says, a mindset change. Because now we see more and more at the individual professional level that you cannot just do things in the old way, you know, sector approach. You have to take into account all these elements and ensure teams are able to do that. So very, very pertinent, I think, for development. Farai, I think there were two questions. One was about groundwater, how to ensure increased finance for groundwater, if you can tackle that. And then there's another question specific to UNICEF relating to, you know, how in your work, the points you made about helping communities either respond or rebuild or you know, address vulnerabilities, you know, with respect to climate impacts. Could you please address those two? Thank you.
Muchera, I'll start with the first question around children and how we keep them in school, and I hope I do justice to our education teams, as this is something I do look at from the periphery and of course where we have intersections with water, sanitation and hygiene. So what we found from the water perspective was, for example, in countries like Ethiopia and Somalia, the cost of water would go 10 to 20 times high, particularly in this Horn of Africa drought that we are just getting out of. What it actually means for a household is that they have to consider things like child marriage, migration, for them to be able to keep up with these rising household costs. So it's quite imperative that we look at the households, their socioeconomic levels, but what also drives their household balance sheet as we try to keep children in school. So for example, from the water side, what we do is when we are supplying water, we just don't provide water for general drinking and hygiene purposes, but we also look at provision of water for livestock. Because if families have livestock, they are able to look after their children using those household resources. We've also seen a nice example from Namibia at a policy, from Angola, at a policy level, where our teams were asked to do an infrastructure census around education. And they said to us, how do we integrate climate resilience into this census? And from a very practical perspective, we had to now think about very practical questions for children. Are you crossing a river as you reach a particular school? Because it means if there is a flood, I cannot go to school. How many days during the year is your own school flooded? Because if school is flooded, a child cannot go to school. So there are many things when we now start considering climate resilience that might not necessarily look like areas of interest in our work that we now need to think about. So the blinkers need to come off. We need to widen our horizons, whichever sector that we are working in. And in UNICEF, we try to make those linkages right across the different work streams. And we now are starting to talk about climate resilient essential services for children. We also have just released our Sustainability Climate Action Plan, where we try to make those linkages around the youth skills, around education, health, nutrition, water sanitation, and how we accelerate our efforts towards climate resilience. So hopefully that responds and gives you a taster of where we are. In terms of groundwater, indeed, I think the Horn of Africa was our biggest challenge, and we realized we were sitting on the gold mine, but not much uptake in terms of groundwater from the water sector. So within UNICEF, we have what we call our Office of Innovation, and their job is to look at our programmatic needs and say, how do we get rapid uptake of approaches by the sector? And together with them, we worked on what we called the groundwater mapping project in the Horn of Africa. And this project covers Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Angola, because we wanted to also see an extension of knowledge to other parts of the continent. And hopefully, resources permitting, we will also be considering how to work in West Africa, particularly in the Sahel. But what we did under this project was we tried to cut down the feasibility time needed for you to understand where the resources are, using remote sensing technology, using hydrogeological data, so that the first line of analysis was done, and we zoom into productive areas where the minimum resources that we have can then be used for on-site ground proofing. What this has resulted in is we have what we call our groundwater maps, where we almost have a heat map type approach showing you where resources are and how much effort one would have to put given the demand that we see and the communities that are living there. So this project is currently ongoing. We've already started to see a lot of results. We are now tapping into water resources that are often much deeper than what we used to. But what it also means is we now need to work around the water resources management components of this work, strengthening aquifer recharge, for example, or even the analysis around water resources to ensure that we are not mining our fossil water. Because if we do that, that is another crisis waiting to happen. What we are starting to see is we are having much more sophisticated operations models coming in play. So community managed water systems now need to be adapted to the level of complexity. We are also working around water resources monitoring, putting data loggers into our systems so that eventually they are able to be connected to the broader water resources network, but also we start to understand the climate impacts on the groundwater resources that we have now, and maybe we have better answers in 5-10 years. So there is a lot of work going on. We do need additional resources coming in for us to scale, but we are already seeing that this is reducing the time frames, and it's also producing a pipeline that financiers are able to engage with, because one of the big criticism is water is a local solution, and often we now have very small levels of investment. So I can say in Afar, in Ethiopia, these are the potential locations, these are the depths we expect to be going through, these are the communities I can cover, and then package that into projects that we can put in front of a financier, but all based on this analysis and work that we are doing. We are also strengthening the capacities of our own teams to also understand the water resources, water supply interactions, because it's been a gray zone that as a sector we have not worked on. And we hope as we work with countries and governments and districts and communities, we are also strengthening those capabilities at a local level.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I hope those, the work that you're doing, the reports, the outputs can be made, available for other partners also to access and build upon or make use of. So thank you very much for that intervention. So we will be wrapping up, but before we do, there's a comment from Dr. Mbazira, please.
No, thank you. I think we've touched on most of it. In the interest of time, I'll be very brief. Just to assure Jochen that as we speak, we are already working on the post-2025 Africa Water and possibly sanitation vision. And these elements of the principles of valuing water, where do we want to go with climate resilience, and how do we want to integrate, have that narrative that is speaking. One of the elements my colleague raised, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, is the issue of financing. As the water sector, we've lamented the issue of incommensurate funding to the task that we have to drive the economy and also underlay efforts to achieve economic growth and social transformation. But part of that element is also that we are not speaking the language that our colleagues in finance also understand. We talk about water in terms of the moral high ground. Water is life. Sanitation is dignity. But we miss the part about allocation of resources where the returns can be justified and making that case to the finance person. That's an element that we also need to bring out very clearly in the vision that we are thinking through, being able to be at the same wavelength with our climate counterparts, our financing counterparts, and all the other sectors that benefit from this. And this is also an appeal that I need to make to our colleagues in financing, that at one point in another forum, I asked my colleague here, the instruments that they have available that allow cross-sector financing. You see, you come to me with an investment in agriculture. It's very easy to make the case that I'll sell this amount of crop and return this amount of money to the bank. But for water management, it's not that clear-cut. At the same time you're investing in energy, you can make a concession on energy development, but you need my water to be able to do this. Now, how can we get also to that space where we can have instruments that are clear-cut for cross-sector financing? Yes. I'm talking about energy, but at the same time, there's an element of that financing for energy that goes to water management. I'm talking about investment in agriculture. There's an element of that that goes to water management to ensure that the pollutants or whatever other externalities are also, you don't have water as a glass ceiling to the targets that you're setting for yourself. And I like the idea that you put to the table about working in teams, because all these elements, I chase my targets in water, you chase your targets in agriculture, another chases their targets in environment. At the end of the day, sometimes we do inadvertent cancelling out of each other. Yet if we look at these things in that broad perspective, we could be able to not necessarily maximize the targets that we can all achieve, but at least achieve a result that is not detrimental to any of the other sectors. We need to consider this seriously. And which brings us to the question that my colleague raised also about groundwater resources. As the person who collects some of that data, I'm fully aware that the rural economy in Africa is driven almost entirely by groundwater resources, much of it not recognized for its contribution. But what are we doing to also address that? Because we do not know exactly how much we are abstracting and utilizing, but we are also focusing. I've seen a shift towards developing the resource. But in some respects, we also need to consider the other aspect of it, that when we focus entirely on development, there could be elements that we are missing. We also need to put an equally the same amount of effort to understanding the resource and making its appreciation. We understand what is there, what we are utilizing, and what we need to develop to sustainably drive the economies that we are trying to do this. I think we also need to put that same effort to ensuring that we understand the resource equally as well in order to be able to develop it sustainably. Which brings us also to the investment that our colleagues, I think even Germany has contributed to this, investment tools for the development of the groundwater sector. But we need to analyze that element of why the uptake of these tools has been slowed down. And that aspect also comes to the appreciation by the member states and the users on what it is the potential that they have in their groundwater resources. So for me, my appeal is that as the financiers and also as the partners that we work with, let's consider these first principles which lead to the better returns on the investments we've made in the tools, in the knowledge resources that we've developed, on development of the sector, in much the same way as we manage it sustainably going into the future and its potential for buffering climate impacts. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Bazira. I think that your intervention, wraps up really our discussion in a good way, and the importance for us to take into account investments across sectors, or addressing a multi-sectoral approach as opposed to singular approach, and how financiers can provide or make available instruments to address that, but also the importance of monitoring the use of groundwater and ensuring that it's accounted for. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I think we've had a very rich session this morning. A few takeaways that come to my mind. One, I think it's clear that water is a key entry point for successful and sustainable climate action. So there is no way we can address water security challenges without considering climate actions. And also there's no way we can address climate challenges in Africa without looking at addressing water security challenges, or bringing the two into alignment. We also clear understanding that we need to ensure that all the projects and investment are climate proofed, targeting vulnerable communities, aligning climate finance and innovative financing, ensuring that we have local capacity, we have a holistic approach to investments, but also discussions around building, enabling environment, policy and governance arrangements that align with climate adaptation, climate challenges, but also enable increased investment from public and private sources. Let me take the opportunity to thank our distinguished panel, Engineer Majuma from Tanzania, Johan from Germany, GIZ, and Farai from UNICEF, for excellent contributions and responses to questions. Let me also thank Dr. Rashid Bazira for your precious time, for being with us as a keynote speaker and contributor, but also Elikad for your presentation, but also for coordinating and organizing this session. On behalf of the African Development Bank and the African Water Facility, I would like to thank you all, and let us continue the conversation. Thank you very much.